Great pleasure to now present um, Strategic Forum India, which we are very proud to be partnered with, the Swedish Institute of International Affairs and Swedish India Business Council, the Embassy of India, and India Unlimited. So Strategic Forum India is 5 years after the Paris Agreement, actions taken and challenges ahead in the global climate crisis. I would love to introduce you to Henrik Chetan Aspengren, a research fellow at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs and coordinator of South Asia Initiative. Over to you, Henrik.
To the third edition of Strategic Forum India. The forum is a collaboration between the Swedish Institute of International Affairs and Sweden-India Business Council. It is supported by the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and I also thank you, Sanju, at India Unlimited. It's 5 years since the Paris Agreement was successfully negotiated. World leaders committed themselves to a wide range of measures to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. Much has happened since then, disrupting international cooperation and global and regional chains of production and supplies. But disruption has also brought a new resolve to strengthen partnerships, as proven by the recent EU-India summit. And perhaps for no global challenge is resolve and cooperation of greater importance than in the handling of the unfolding climate crisis. Sweden and India are taking a leadership role in the climate conversation and in climate action. Climate cooperation is an important dimension of the Swedish-Indian partnership, but more can be done. So we are very pleased to welcome honorable ministers from the Government of India and Government of Sweden to address the topic. Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and Information and Broadcasting, and Heavy Industries and Public Enterprises, Prakash, Javadekar, and Minister for Environment and Climate, as well as Deputy Prime Minister, Isabella Lövin. The ministers will deliver their remarks on the topic 5 years after the Paris Agreement, actions taken and challenges ahead in the global climate crisis. We have asked the ministers to address, among other things, in what ways do Sweden and India cooperate in the global climate crisis? And how can India and Sweden pursue joint leadership on climate action? After the ministers' remarks, an expert panel will pick up the conversation. The panel consists of Niklas Bremberg, Senior Research Fellow at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, and Arunabha Ghosh, Founder and CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And Arunabha is one of the chief architects of the International Solar Alliance. The panel will be moderated by Artie Davis, Sweden-India Business Council. So with that, Minister Javadekar, may I request you to please deliver your remarks.
Excellency, Madam Isabella Lövin, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Environment, Sweden, Arunabha Ghosh and Madam, both experts from Sweden and India. Today we are discussing very important issue of how jointly we can work to create an atmosphere in the world so that everybody follows their own commitments done in Paris Agreement. At the outset, let me state we place great value on our bilateral partnership with Sweden. Our ties go back a long way and have become stronger over the years. I'm pleased to share that Sweden and India are jointly working together on different global environmental issues, including the industrial transition leadership. In the field of environment and climate change, our cooperation is guided by the framework of MOU that was signed between our two countries in 2009. This MOU lays out several priority areas for cooperation, such as on air and water quality management, clean production and technology, new and renewable energy, integrated solid waste management, etc. I think this is our base of cooperation bilaterally. But when we talk about our leadership in global climate change era, we have more responsibility, and I think we have to first act what we preach. And I'm very happy to say that India has acted what it has committed. We promised that we will reduce our emission intensity by GDP by 25% before 2020. No country, many countries have not taken their commitments of prior 2020, pre-2020. But India is probably the only country which has taken pre-2020 commitment and has followed it. And from since 2015 to 2020, we have reduced our emissions by 21% on the basis of 2005. So this we could achieve because of our determination and because of our resolve to achieve the targets. We are not responsible for the climate change world is witnessing because it is the result of 100 years of emission. Our historical contribution is just 3%, and our even current emissions are just 6% of the total emissions of the world. But let me tell you that we believe that as a responsible nation, not for climate change, but as a responsible nation for the future, we want to be the part of the solution, though we are not part of the problem. And more importantly, therefore, historical responsibility, equity, CBDR, respective capacities, and all these are important things. And therefore, advanced countries promise the developing world $100 billion a year in 2009. So now it amounts to $1 trillion, more than $1 trillion. And that is what we are saying that must come because every climate action has a cost. When we talk of so many issues and new technologies in the field of renewable to water to all fields, every new technology will require cost, and it will increase the cost for the customers. And that is the problem for India like country, where our per capita income is not even $1,000 or even $3,000, $4,000. US is tenfold more, $40,000, $50,000 per capita per annum. So we must evolve a pattern where we help each other and actually work together to achieve this. Otherwise, world is not respecting their own commitment. As far as all reports published since 2015, all reports are saying that India is 1.5 degree compliant in our actions. And that is what is the certificate for India. And I think we want to build that. We have built renewable power. We promised 40% of renewable power by 2030, 40% of our energy capacity mix. We have already built 36%. It's huge. And 136 gigawatts. It is again a remarkable progress done in last 6 years. And therefore, we need to calibrate all these efforts of India. I can also say that along with these two things we are also greening the country with many efforts. We have increased our tree cover by 15,000 square kilometers. It is huge. 15,000 square kilometers in 6 years, and that too in a country where population is 1.4 billion people, 16% of the world population, 16% of cattle population as well. And still, we have 8% of biodiversity, and we have grown and increased our tree cover. That must be looked into this context. Therefore, we have also uh, issued more than 400 million LED bulbs. Therefore, we have saved emission to a great extent by by not having consuming the consumption of power has been reduced because LED bulbs consume very less power, and therefore that emission also is reduced to a great extent. Our Ujjwala Yojana, with 80 million households getting the, instead of firewood, now they burn the LPG gas stoves. So that is also one area where we have taken a lead, and to that extent, firewood is saved. So this is also one important aspect of the things. We have number of super critical thermal power plants increased from 40 in 2015 to 66 in 2018. So this is again a huge step. We have planned closure and phasing out of old power plants which emit more. Instead of such plants, we want to have supercritical technology and renewable power. We have also done many actions and also formed International Solar Alliance, which has become an instant hit and success. We have also launched Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure to promote resilience of new and existing infrastructure system to climate and disaster risks. This is very important because we are experiencing extreme climate events now very often than what we used to have. So, India also reiterates that countries who have not made pre-2020 commitments should bridge the gaps. Ambitious long-term plans become less relevant in the absence of immediate action for effective implementation of goals. It is important that the countries deliver current actions, including bridging the gaps in implementation as well as financial support commitments of USD $100 billion per year to the developing world. As we move ahead towards the implementation phase of Paris Agreement, climate action needs to be integrated, comprehensive, holistic, as has been highlighted by Honorable Prime Minister. As our Prime Minister is passionate about climate change, he brought two topics in the Paris Climate Agreement, and they are included in the preamble. That is lifestyle issues, because unless we amend our lifestyles to suit the mitigation of climate change, we will not effectively mitigate the challenge, because you cannot continue to exorbitantly exploit the earth and still say that uh, we are climate compliant. That don't happen, and therefore we need to act together in the context. And he also brought in climate justice, concept of climate justice. And in climate justice, he means think of all poor countries and think of all poor sections of society, because they should not be overburdened. Because, as I said, this is the culmination and result of 100 years of emission, and we cannot just ignore this basic fact. Today we are observing India-Sweden Innovation Day. Innovation is key in development of climate-friendly cutting-edge technologies for addressing climate change challenges. Innovation is required both in development of new technologies. But my one point is that we should not profit from disaster. If we are thinking that the climate change is a disaster, then we should not profit from it. We should make new technologies available at cost of production. If they are made available at a cost, affordable cost, then only other countries and developing countries and emerging economies can take and use it at a large scale. Otherwise, we are not here a selling platform for higher end technologies which cost too much. Price reduction to such level that PVs acquired the most dominant position of the world energy stage. India has been making new records each time with the low solar tariff, and just few days back set a record of low tariff of rupees 2, around $0.0270 per kilowatt. It's ridiculously low, but it is happening. It was 19 rupees, now it is 2 rupees. So it is a very big transition. India has successfully capitalized commercially available technologies in renewable energy and resource efficiency in taking sustainable strides in climate action. Indian cement companies have demonstrated that it is possible to achieve low carbon industrial growth with the right combination of appropriate technologies and policy support. Therefore, my final appeal is that let world think in this COVID pandemic time, because we are meeting virtually, we meet often, we must put out our heart and ask ourselves the question of the sustainability of the earth at this juncture. And to that end, I can say that this is a responsibility of all countries. And so those who have not taken up second commitment period for Kyoto Protocol must also do their bit, must also agree. Let us not indulge into blame game. Let us not vilify one country or the other. Let us not create villain out of some countries. We must all work together to bring out a real change, and that is what is needed. And India is successfully capitalized commercially available technologies, I said, and the experience and learning of hybrid iron and steel production with green hydrogen implemented by Sweden is a good thing. But I am asking, what is the cost? Because cost matters. My people are using steel at a certain rate. If that rate exceeds, I will always compare cost versus the climate impact. And therefore, we all need to work together to bring down the costs of new innovations. I think that's the message for this Innovation Day. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your remarks. And I now request Minister Isabella Lövin to deliver her remarks.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you. Okay, I'll start again then. Minister Javadekar, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me express my sincere thanks to the organizers of this important event. I'd like to underscore that the bilateral relations between Sweden and India are excellent. India is a strategic and highly valued partner to Sweden, and we're eager to deepen this relation and cooperation between us in different ways. Over the years, our cooperation has developed, for example, within the field of science and innovation, which my colleague Minister just mentioned. And the partnership agreement that was signed 2 years ago is an excellent example of that. Trade and investment is another area where we cooperate. Today, there's more than 200 Swedish companies present in India, and over 70 Indian companies present in Sweden. I'd like to start now by underscoring one very important thing. I think in these very challenging times and in a very challenging point in history, I think it's very important that Sweden and India are upholding the common values of democracy, of human rights, of fundamental freedoms, and support of a rules-based global order centered on multilateralism. This is more important than ever. Sweden and India have a common task of actively promoting and safeguarding these principles, including freedom of expression and gender equality. Now, cooperation and partnership are and will be key in combating the challenges of mankind that we are facing. There's no other way of doing this. We can't do it alone. We need to work together. Although there's great differences between our countries, both in size and population, of course, I do believe that we can learn and mutually gain from joining hands. This day is a testimony to that, as we gather representatives that cover a broad spectrum of stakeholders, businesses, academia, think tanks, etc., from both our countries. Ladies and gentlemen, in just a few days, we will be celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. And I hope that next year, we will be welcoming the US back to the Paris Agreement, which is very positive. But at the same time, we as a global community are far behind in meeting our commitments according to the Paris Agreement. We've seen civil society, the youth movement in particular, calling for more ambitious action, and they are right. But we're also witnessing very strong commitment and engagement from businesses, with a steady stream of companies and financial actors that are committing to the Paris Agreement, or rather to reaching net zero emissions by mid-century. And net zero, that call is not about business as usual. This is about transformation, a transformation of our society. We know it can be difficult, but we also know that we as a global community, our different countries, have been through transformations before. We can do it. The shift from fossil to renewable energy will, of course, have implications for all countries, as well as for each and every one of us. The 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development and the motto of leaving no one behind will help us frame this transition. As governments, we have a key role to play in ensuring a place for everyone in the climate-neutral economy. As a global community, we also have a responsibility to support each other in this transition. In Sweden, we have set up an initiative called Fossil Free Sweden, which forms a partnership between government and businesses to make Sweden fossil-free by the year 2045. And so far, 22 businesses, together representing around 70% of Swedish emissions, have presented their roadmaps to reaching net zero emissions by 2045. In addition, the Swedish government last year presented its first climate policy action plan to Parliament with some 130 measures that we will implement over the next few years in all policy areas. The action plan is a requirement in the Swedish climate policy framework, which was adopted 2017 by the Swedish Parliament, and is our framework to implement the Paris Agreement nationally. And we aim to be climate neutral by 2045. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, the pandemic, the COVID-19 epidemic has caused a global crisis that has exposed the global vulnerability of our society. The road to recovery is not without its hurdles, but it provides also an opportunity to rebuild and build back better. A more resilient and sustainable society, that is what we need to rebuild. It's therefore imperative that the climate transition constitutes a starting point for the recovery. And the Swedish government budget for 2021 will be and is the greenest in history. But not only in Sweden, we see heightened ambitions. We see these green signs all over the world. China committed to carbon neutrality by 2060. The EU and Japan and South Korea have all committed to climate neutrality by 2050. And we hope to present the new EU commitment, our national determined contribution, at the Climate Ambition Summit on December the 12th. In parallel to our NDC efforts, it's also been encouraging to see how quickly the concept of green recovery has been established. We have an opportunity to accelerate implementation of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda, and making best use of the estimated $12 trillion allocated globally for recovery after the pandemic. That is the amount that the IMF calculates that the governments allocated to cushion the blow from the pandemic in response to the economic and health crisis. We're also seeing more and more evidence of the benefits of a healthy and green recovery. A recent study by the C40, which is the global network of 97 cities, including Chennai, Delhi, Kolkata, as well as Stockholm, found that a global green recovery could create 50 million new jobs and prevent 270,000 premature deaths. It would reduce air pollution, of course. It would save water and lead to over $1.4 billion savings in health costs. I'm so happy to see that our joint innovation partnership for a sustainable future with India that was signed by our prime ministers during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Sweden in 2018 is delivering concrete actions, such as joint calls for research collaboration between Indian and Sweden stakeholders in areas such as smart cities, smart energy grids, and artificial intelligence and digital health. This is very, very exciting, because innovation will continue to play a very key role in accelerating climate action. Hybrid was mentioned by my colleague just earlier on. This is a good example where we can see the potential of disruptive technology leaps. Continued and enhanced cooperation between India and Sweden on innovation will contribute to leadership and new jobs opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, as I stressed in my introduction, to overcome this climate crisis, we cannot work alone. We need to work together. We need leaders both in the private and public sectors, and we also need industry to play a pivotal role. And that is why Sweden and India together launched Lead It, the leadership group for industry transition at the UN Climate Action Summit last year. And next week, the Honorable Minister Javadekar and I will co-chair the next Lead It Summit. I look forward to this important event, which will be digital, of course. And we will now have more than 28, we'll have 28 governments and major industry firms that have joined Lead It. And we welcome more companies and heavy industry to join as well. Together, we call for continued momentum and ambitious action on policy, technology, and finance to ensure an industry transition that tackles the climate crisis and creates decent jobs and delivers prosperity for all. And we reaffirm our commitment to accelerating this transition of all industry sectors to low carbon pathways in line with the Paris Agreement. About our plans for 2022 to conclude. In 2022, it will be 50 years since the world gathered in Stockholm, 1972, in the first UN conference on the UN on the human environment. And to commemorate the spirit of that conference and once again seek to rally the global community behind strengthened cooperation and action, Sweden has offered to host a high-level UN meeting in Stockholm in June 2022. And our vision for 2022 will be to redefine our relationship to nature, promote green and inclusive recovery, and also seeing more collaboration with relevant stakeholders, including the youth. We look forward to a strong partnership with India in going forward with Stockholm Plus 50, exploring opportunities for collaboration. And I'd like to end my speech by quoting your late Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, at the Stockholm Conference in 1972, where she said, "There are grave misgivings that the discussion on ecology may be designed to distract attention from the problems of war and poverty. We have to prove that the disinherited majority of the world, that ecology and conservation will not work against their interest, but will bring an improvement in their lives." These words were true then, and they are still true today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your insightful remark. And many thanks to both Minister Lövin and Javadekar for generously sharing your views. I now leave the floor to Artie Davis, who will moderate the expert panel. Artie?
With me in the studio here today is Niklas from Swedish Institute of International Affairs, and with us in Delhi is Arunabha Ghosh from CEEW. Now, we've heard a lot, and I'm going to start with you, Niklas. We've heard a lot here today from the ministers at the highest level of government talking about what the commitments are from both sides of moving forward. We've also seen the MOUs that have been signed by both countries and the joint partnerships, be it the Innovation Declaration and the Industrial Transition with the UN. But let's bring this down to the ground. What can we do to make these high ambitions a reality? What can we do with the two countries to leverage climate action and international collaboration? What can technology do to play a role in this? And I cannot ignore that both ministers talked about economy and the market. And how do we bring that to play and to bear when we actually tackle some of the grave challenges we have ahead when it comes to climate change, disparities in population and economy, and the global community moving forward? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ariati, for handing me such a big question. I think, first of all, thank you for having me here. I think it has been very interesting to listen to the ministers and kind of see their perspectives on this issue. To me, I think, and in response to your question, Ariati, I think an aspect that was not touched upon maybe by the two ministers, but where I see, at least from kind of a research perspective, the possibility for increased collaboration between Sweden and India in different international forums. And I would say that is linked to obviously the climate crisis, and one undeniable aspect of this climate crisis, because that aspect is that even though we would succeed in reducing drastically CO2 emission in a very short time frame, we are still going to face climate challenges in the years ahead. And those climate challenges will produce risk for certain people and for certain communities. So in order to address those challenges, I think it's important to think in terms of we've talked a lot about innovation and new technologies, and I think there's definitely something to be said about the role for new technologies in, for instance, anticipating, forecasting these challenges and how they're going to affect certain populations, for instance. I'd like to mention a research project that I'm involved in, funded by Mistra Geo. Mistra is the research funder, and the program is Mistra Geopolitics, where we're going to look at specifically the role of, for instance, artificial intelligence in anticipating climate challenges and climate risk. And here there is definitely a role to play for countries, but also international organizations. And I think something that we have also seen, and this relates to a recent report from, for instance, the Red Cross, is that there is a stark mismatch between how climate adaptation funding is spent and where, so to speak, the humanitarian needs are felt the most. And obviously there is a need to be better at directing international funds and developmental funds, humanitarian funds, to places where they can be most useful. The minister from India, Javadekar, mentioned climate justice, of course, and mentions the need to be able to boost resilience in the face of these kind of challenges. And I think here the role of technology is definitely just at the beginning of its potential. But I think there are two more things that we need to kind of address in this aspect, and that is the need to connect local knowledge with institutional reforms in, for instance, a setting as the UN. We've seen past experiences where Sweden has been very successful here. I think that can be drawn upon moving forward also with a setting, for instance, with Sweden and India.
Thanks so much, Niklas. I'm actually going to have to cut you off there. But I think that's a great way to segue to Dr. Ghosh sitting with us in Delhi when you talk about local and global coming together to create solutions that fit for purpose within the country, but also speak to an international audience. Now, Dr. Ghosh, you've been critically responsible for, as Minister Javadekar mentioned before, the International Solar Alliance. The concept of market is not new to you, and how to bring very different populations together, very different audiences together. How can we actually use what's happening in India, what's happening in Sweden, and leverage international climate action within these two countries, but also in a broader perspective?
Thank you, Aarti, and good day to Honorable Minister Lövin and Honorable Minister Javadekar. Thank you very much for having me. I'll come straight to the point. We don't have much time on this panel, and we don't have much time for the planet. So what do we need to do? There are two things missing as we move into 2021. Number one is that we still have to rejuvenate our economies reeling from a major shock from the pandemic. And therefore, we have to deliver jobs, growth, and sustainability all together. And the second thing that's missing is trust. The same trust, the foundations of trust that Minister Javadekar talked about, climate justice, etc., that led to the Paris Agreement, has dissipated to an extent in the intervening years. Now, how do we rebuild our economies, rebuild our communities, and also inject trust back into the climate process at an international level? This can be done both bilaterally and multilaterally. So let me offer two specific suggestions to the honorable ministers here. At a bilateral level, the history of cooperation and innovation between both Sweden and India can be built upon on specific things that still need further work, still where more action can be delivered. And that, I believe, one of the areas is the way we are urbanizing. We are one of the fastest urbanizing countries in the world, and how we move our people will determine how our people get to work, how there's economic opportunities come, etc. I think there is a huge opportunity here for working together on electric public transport. India has huge ambitions for electrifying its vehicle fleet, but the bulk of the people actually walk in India. And if they can move in public transport, which is low carbon, but that innovation is designed collaboratively, but developed and manufactured in India, you get jobs, growth, and sustainability in both countries. At a plurilateral level, both Honorable Minister Javadekar and Honorable Minister Lövin have mentioned hydrogen. What did the International Solar Alliance do? It basically aggregated demand. It brought together the countries that had the potential, but were not getting the investment. And by aggregating the demand, you bring down the costs, both of the technology and of finance. Can we leverage the same lessons but in a different way by creating a global green hydrogen alliance. India and Sweden are leading the industry transition track. Green hydrogen currently, as Minister Javadekar mentioned, is extremely expensive, 20 to 30% more to make green steel out of green hydrogen than using fossil fuels. But again, there is history of how countries can come together, pool technical resources, financial resources, make the intellectual property publicly available, establish clear rules of liability and responsibility, and use their markets to develop and deploy the technologies that can be therefore used much faster than if individual countries tried to go down that route on their own. So two basic ideas: let's work together on sustainable urbanization, and let's perhaps build together a global green hydrogen alliance. I hope that can re-inject the jobs growth and sustainability we need, as well as the trust that is needed in climate negotiations.
We hand back to Henrik for the vote of thanks for today's ministerial session and expert panel. Henrik, over to you.
Thank you very much for what has been a great session. And thank you to the honorable ministers, to the experts, to Arti, and thank you everyone for joining the third edition of Strategic Forum India. We look forward to keeping the conversation going through this format. Also, thank you to the teams at the SIBC, at UI, especially Axel Nordenstam, who has pulled this together, and also, of course, to India Unlimited. Thank you very much all for tuning in.